Good afternoon, my friends. Good afternoon, my enemies. Good afternoon to everybody. I had a piece today at Real Clear Politics that, of course, I'll link to in the description box, or if you happen to be listening to this live, you can easily Google or look at my Twitter feed or just go to realclearpolitics.com and you will see it on the front page. And it has to do with this recent round of scaremongering around the prospect that Tulsi Gabbard could run for president on a third-party ticket. Now, these fears or this paranoia intensified over the past couple of weeks after Hillary Clinton now infamously launched her unprovoked attack on Tulsi by claiming that she was controlled by some sinister cabal of Russians and Republicans. The precise contours of that alliance are never quite defined, but they don't have to be because it's not meant to be an exactly literal charge. It's just meant to gin up apprehensions about what Tulsi is supposedly up to. So you had a battery of pundits and commentators and operatives over the past couple of weeks, basically just asserting with no evidence that Tulsi plans to run on a third-party ticket. And it's strange because one little piece of countervailing evidence that you think might be taken into account is that Tulsi has repeatedly and unequivocally denied that she will run for president as a third party. That's just what she has said, and she's been consistent about it. And that predates this Hillary dust up by months. So in order to believe that Tulsi is now dead set on running third party, you have to simply ignore what she has said repeatedly about the subject, or you have to believe that she is being outright and maliciously deceptive in what she is saying. Now, it wouldn't be a first for a politician with obviously ambitions to achieve power to be less than honest about their intentions. But let's say that Tulsi theoretically did want to keep open the option of running as an independent or on a third-party ticket or as something other than a Democrat. She could have as easily have been cagier when she's been asked about this prospect. Like, she could have said, I don't plan on doing that now. She could have said, that's not my intent. But she has ruled it out. She has been more than explicit about it. Now, I would assume that some of her supporters would prefer that she did perhaps run as a third-party candidate, or at least that she not rule it out. So they may not be happy about her fairly unequivocal disavowals. But that's just the reality of what she has said. And yet, if you look at the people who have been warning about this potentiality, they don't know how to process this clear pattern of disavowal from Tulsi, or they just ignore it. And why do they ignore it? Because warning about a third-party candidacy is useful rhetorically for them. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can read about it in greater detail in the Real Clear Politics column. But essentially what it means is that partisan pundits, and right now I'm going to focus on Democratic allied pundits, although you can make a similar argument for others. They like to invent or concoct the specter of fictitious third-party candidates because it allows them to scold and to denigrate that non-existent third-party candidate in a way that almost imposes discipline on anybody who would even remotely contemplate defying the two-party system. So right now they love to proclaim that we're in the midst of this horrendous national emergency, and therefore even considering, even toying with the idea of running as a third party is now more intolerable than ever, which is funny because I've now followed enough presidential cycles to know that people, for whatever reason, will claim that every election is a national emergency. Like things will never be the same if X or Y candidate wins. The country is going to go down the tubes if my preferred candidate doesn't secure an electoral college victory. This is the end of America if the outcome is not what I prefer, etc. So that's always a talking point, especially as the election draws nearer. You're going to hear stuff like that constantly. And it's funny because, like, I think back now to, for example, the 2012 election when people were saying similar stuff, and the stakes now just seem so different, or the stakes of that election in hindsight seem so much lower than they were portrayed at the time, that it just kind of indicates to you the fundamental hollowness of that scare tactic. Oh my, like the constitutional republic will collapse if Ohio votes for so and so. But it's useful rhetorically and politically for these pundits to prop up the threat of a third party candidate, because it means that they can wield that threat as sort of this disciplining tactic to keep everybody in line, to make them aware that if you even vaguely, remotely entertain the idea of transgressing the boundaries of typical partisan American politics, you will be destroyed. You will be smeared. You will be portrayed as a crank. You will be portrayed as probably in line with Russia, because Russia, according to this stupid, facile narrative, loves to stoke division in the country. And you stoke division, supposedly, by encouraging and propping up third-party candidacies. So that will be the attack marshaled against anybody who could even theoretically detract from the vote total of the eventual Democratic nominee. Now, of course, it's a little or a lot fruitless or futile to speculate at this point who exactly Tulsi would disadvantage were she to run for a third party ticket, which she says she is not. But just as a thought experiment, I don't know that it's at all clear who that would supposedly disadvantage or advantage. Yeah, the majority of her supporters and volunteers and staff, as I mentioned in the piece, do tend to be Democrats or Democrat-leaning independents. But there are enough people online now who I've heard state that they are conservatives or libertarians, and while they may not agree with Tulsi on every policy issue, they appreciate something about her candor. They appreciate her affect. They appreciate that she's willing to defy various partisan orthodoxies. And so they state at least a willingness to, if not vote for her, maybe consider voting for her. So I don't think it's necessarily implausible to state that were she to run, she would get a fair amount of Republican support, especially a Republican support among voters who maybe had foreign policy front of mind when they voted for Trump, and they recognize now that he generally has not followed through on his pledges to shift the trajectory meaningfully of U.S. foreign policy. Like, for example, today we learned that after the supposed withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria that Trump ordered early last month, and which created such a media meltdown, they're going to end up with approximately 900 U.S. troops remaining in Syria, but performing slightly different functions. And how many U.S. troops were in Syria when Trump issued his order? Approximately 1,000. I mean, those are the official totals. We don't know how many contractors and special ops types are there, but at least if you go by the official total, it was 1,000 prior to Trump issuing his order. And once these troop movements are complete pursuant to the partial withdrawal that Trump declared, there's going to end up with roughly 900. So that's not a withdrawal. That doesn't actually change the mission in Syria enough that it would have warranted the total freakout that the media had over the past several weeks. And if you have U.S. troops guarding oil fields, it's very possible that they could enter some kind of combat situation. And something tells me that the government of Syria, such as Assad, does not welcome an indefinite U.S. troop presence in Syria, where he's trying to reclaim full authority over the territory of the country. I kind of doubt that he is going to be entirely thrilled at the idea of 900 troops remaining there in perpetuity to guard oil fields and prevent Syrian authorities from gaining access to their natural resources. So if you're a Republican and maybe you're not totally bought into every Republican propaganda talking point, and you can actually analyze things fairly objectively, and you have at least an inclination toward independent thought, it's possible that you could end up voting for somebody like Tulsi. I don't doubt that, but it's just not something that the key player in the scenario, who is Tulsi, has even given a smidgen of credence as to actually it happening. So you have that. Tulsi may end up drawing support from Trump. But for the pundits who are now out there with their heads on their hair on fire, screaming about how damaging this is, it doesn't matter what the ultimate result would be in terms of who she draws support from. I mean, these are all theoretical exercises that don't have much bearing in currently existing reality. The currently existing reality that they want to use is to erect this false threat of a third party campaign, again, to impose discipline, to demand that nobody deviate from the partisan line, to put up this kind of phony unified front against Trump, and to make it so that every electoral resource is poured exclusively in the sole task of defeating Trump, regardless of who the nominee is. It's just a function of their partisanship. Now, is it justifiable to want to defeat Trump? Yeah, I don't think Trump has earned a second term, and I didn't advocate for voting him in the first term. And I think there's good reason to want him to be removed from office. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to spend every waking hour besmirching anybody who might want to broaden the horizons of a U.S. electoral politics, whether it's through a third-party run or some other mechanism, and say, oh, we have to destroy this person now because they could do what is regarded as the most horrible thing you can ever do in U.S. politics now, at least according to media elites, which is they could diminish the likelihood that Trump is actually ousted from office. I don't think that's a particularly healthy way of looking at the situation. And so that's why I think it's worth circumventing this sort of useless theoretical discussion about who Tulsi would advantage or disadvantage were she to run, and to look at what the rhetorical function now is of these threats or of this pundit naysaying. And that's basically the current dynamic. So that'll do it for now. Like I said, look up that piece, or if you're watching the version of this video after I complete the live stream, I will put it in the description box. Let me know what you think. Apologies for the relative lack of frequency of videos over the past maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I've had a bunch of stuff going on, but I'm going to get back into that shortly to satisfy your urges for never-ending content from me, which, as I know, what you all desperately crave. Okay, talk to you later.